Okay, now there's a wonderful thing that happens, and that is people are no longer on the floor, and they're no longer standing up. And that means that we've got enough seats for everybody. And those of you who aren't here, I'm almost tempted to say, raise your hands. I think we got to find a way to get the deadbeats out of the class. And I guess the thing to do is to take attendance. It's so boring. But I think Thursday, I'll start handing around a sheet for everybody to sign. The point is that I would like to people who don't come to lecture to drop the course, and people who do come to lecture to stay in the course. And that way I can admit all of the waiting list. In principle, I want everybody who is highly motivated and wants to take the course to take the course. I don't know how to test motivation except attendance. So we will start checking attendance one way or another. All right. How many of you are still trying to get admitted to the course legally? Okay, I'll find a way. We'll find a way to get you in. And just keep nagging me, and I will we'll start taking attendance, and I think we'll find that people drop the course when they discover that after not very many missed classes, they fail the course. All right, well, where are we? Everybody knows what the reading assignments are because they're all on the syllabus, which is, I hope, accurate. But anyway, now you've got your first writing assignment. And writing assignments, in a way, are the most important part of the course because you will forget most of what I say, but you're likely to remember what you actually write yourself. I know this for a fact. The first university term paper I ever wrote was in a geology course, and my term paper was about Crater Lake, and I still regard myself as the world's leading authority on Crater Lake. If you want some info, I don't remember anything else in the course, but I remember my damn term paper. Anyway, I didn't do anything with geology before or since. I went to Crater Lake, and it's pretty much as I reported in my term paper. I didn't test the depth of the lake. All right, so here we are. Now where I've reached last time, we reached the culminating point of 2,500 years of almost fruitless philosophical speculation. I say almost because there were a few hardy souls who had enough sense to see that Descartes was entirely wrong in supposing we all had minds, that there was some spiritual ghost trying to get out of us. But what really was going on, it took the 20th century to discover there's a computer program in there, and that's what makes us not only tick, but do everything else that matters for human life. And so we reached the culminating point of the materialist tradition, which I baptized strong artificial intelligence, but which we could equally well call it computer functionalism, because it's a version of functionalism. And it says the mind is to the brain as the program is to the hardware. Now, there are several appealing features of this theory. One ironic feature, I don't know if it's appealing, is though it is the culmination of materialism, in a way, it's not even essentially materialistic. Because anything could implement a program. It could be angels in heaven or any entity that is capable of carrying out the steps in the program. It needn't be physical. In fact, of course, all of the computers we know are physical, but the physics is incidental. What matters is the implementation of the program. But psychologically and sociologically, in the time when what became the dominant view, and at some time really, I think in the 1970s, in the latter half of the 20th century, this enabled a whole lot of different intellectual movements to come together. There was computer science and artificial intelligence. There was a philosophy, particularly the functionalist philosophy in the philosophy of mind. There was cognitive psychology, which was then trying to break with the behaviorist tradition. And then there were also cognitivist movements in anthropology and linguistics as well. And all of these came together in the foundation of the discipline of cognitive science. So strong AI, strong artificial intelligence, and the early days of cognitive science tended to go together. And I was active in founding the cognitive science program in Berkeley. And in those days, the Sloan Foundation put up some money to fly various people around the country to lecture on the need to have cognitive science programs. We were called Sloan Rangers. And I had to fly into Yale to lecture to their artificial intelligence lab. And that's when I discovered that people actually believe that. It seemed to me so crazy. I couldn't imagine anybody believing it. Anyway, I won't tell you the drama that ensued. You're going to hear about that later. But this view still survives. I was reading some story in, I think, Science or some other scientific journal the other day. And Stephen Hawking was asked, what is consciousness? And he said, well, it's a computer program. You know, he's a smart guy. He thinks it's a computer program. He's mistaken. I'm going to tell you in detail why, but not this morning. Okay, so we've gone through the materialist tradition. And this morning I want to devote a lot of time to the criticisms of materialism. But before I do that, there are two versions of materialism that I haven't mentioned, and I want to mention both of those. One is eliminativist materialism. Eliminativism. And eliminativism says, eliminativism, let me see if I spell it right, eliminativism. God, there's too many damn letters in it. But anyway, eliminativism says you don't have to reduce the mind to the brain or the computer hardware. There isn't any such thing as the mind. We can get rid of it. I guess the leading theorist here was Paul Churchland, and I hope he's in the reader, Paul and Patty Churchland. But it's, well, in any case, I'll give you the argument for it. It seems to me, well, I'm not criticizing these views yet. I'm just going to tell you the view. The view is that if you think of things where we've done a reduction, the way we reduce lightning to electricity. Lightning actually consists of a discharge of electrons from cloud to cloud or from cloud to ground. Or the way we reduce water to H2O molecules. So the story goes, we can't do that type of reduction for mental states. If you take something like belief, it's very unlikely that all beliefs will have the same sort of neurobiological configuration in the brain. So it looks like a future science of the brain will have no use for the notion of belief because you can't do a type reduction. You can't do what they like to call a smooth reduction in a way that you can reduce light to electromagnetic radiation or genes to DNA molecules. That's not such a good reduction anyway, but anyway, there are ideals of reduction, and you can't do this sort of reduction on mental states. They just don't match up with the brain in the right way. So it looks like a future science of the brain, a mature science of the brain, will have no use for these notions, and effectively that means they don't exist. There aren't any such things as beliefs and desires. It's an illusion. It's an illusion like phlogiston. Remember, phlogiston was people had a theory about combustion, and they thought that in combustion, phlogiston escaped from the burning object, but it turned out the theory didn't work, so they had to give up the belief in phlogiston. Now, this illustrates the main argument for eliminative materialism, and here's how it goes when spelled out as an argument. Why do we postulate these entities anyway? Why do we postulate electrons and molecules and phlogiston and oxidization? And the answer is we postulate them because we want to use them to explain phenomena. And the way we explain the phenomena is by giving a theory. So the postulation of entities, whether it's phlogiston or electrons, is justified by their role in a theory. Now, and this is the key point, if the theory proves to be false, then you have to give up the belief in the entities. The reason we still believe in electrons but don't believe in phlogiston is that the theory that used phlogiston turned out to be a false theory. The theory that used electrons turned out to be a True theory. Okay, now the story goes. Why do we say that people have beliefs and desires? We say they have beliefs and desires as part of a theory. We want to explain their behavior. But if the theory turns out to be false, then we have to give up the belief in beliefs and desires. There aren't any such things as beliefs and desires. Now, it's true, we say things like, I believe there aren't any such things as beliefs and desires, and that sounds crazy. That sounds like you're contradicting yourself. But their answer to that was to say, look, it's just a manner of speaking. It's like saying, I'll meet you under the campanile at sunset. Well, nobody really supposes the sun is actually going to set. It's just a manner of speaking. Now, similarly, if you say, I don't believe there are any beliefs, you're not really contradicting yourself because you're going to get rid of beliefs. So the steps in the argument go. There's a theory that postulates beliefs and desires and hopes and fears and pains and tickles and itches and consciousness and all of the rest of it. That theory, we might as well give a name. It's sort of common sense psychology, and we will call it folk psychology. Okay, now, folk psychology is a theory, and like any theory, it can be proven true or false. As far as we know, folk psychology is false. But if it's false, then the entities postulated by the theory don't exist. You have to give up the belief in those entities. So it turns out the falsity of folk psychology will show there are no such things as beliefs and hopes and fears and desires and all the rest of it. Now, there are bad arguments in philosophy. I think this one probably gets the prize for the worst argument over the past 20... Well, I promised myself I wouldn't criticize this stuff yet. Forget about that. You can read what I think about this, but let's go on with the argument. The argument goes on. Why is folk psychology false? I said it's false. Common sense psychology is false. Why? Well, number one, folk theories are always false. I mean, the folk theory of the day and night, that the sun is going around the earth, or the folk theory of the astronomical objects in the sky, that there are really holes in the celestial sphere, and the light is coming through the holes in the celestial sphere. Whatever folk theory you got, it's false. Folk theories are always false. But furthermore, we know certain things about our folk theory, the common sense psychology that we all have. The common sense psychology we know is false because it's not a successful research program. You can't go to the National Science Foundation and try to get a grant to do folk psychology. Now, a research assistant of mine was giving a lecture in Paris and trying to say why these Americans believe that folk psychology is false. And when she said this, that it's a poor research program, everybody burst out laughing, as they should have done. And Peter Strawson used to say, well, if you want to see folk psychology in action, read the works of such ordinary folk as Marcel Proust and Henry James. You want to see folk psychology. But in any case, the idea was that somehow or other, our ordinary common sense way of dealing with people is a scientific theory, and as such, it is, as they say, a degenerating research program. According to Paul Churchland, folk psychology hasn't made any progress since Aristotle. Think about it. Aristotle's physics, we don't take that seriously. But Aristotle's ethics, you're still forced to read that kind of stuff. And that shows, according to Paul Churchland, that folk psychology hasn't made progress the way it should, and that shows that it's false. Okay, so the argument goes, entities exist because they're postulated by theories to explain phenomenon. If the theory's true, the entity exists. If the theory's false, the entity doesn't exist. That's why phlogiston doesn't exist. The theory is false. And therefore, since folk psychology is false, we have to give up the belief in the entities postulated by folk psychology. Now, as an old note taker, I have to point out, I've actually given you two arguments against the entities of folk psychology. One is there's no smooth reduction of beliefs and desires to brain states in a way that there's a smooth reduction of light to electromagnetic radiation. or water to H2O molecules. And two, the entities that are common sense entities, like beliefs and desires, are postulated by the theory of folk psychology. Folk psychology is false, so if the theory is false, which it is, you have to give up the belief in folk psychology. Now, I don't have an easy time explaining this to you without throwing up or bursting out laughing, because I don't actually believe this, okay? But I'm going to tell you, right now I want you to appreciate these guys. They're smart. Some of them are even friends of mine, though it turns out they're less friendly than I had thought. But in any case, we're going to go on now to another famous theory, and then I'm going to start criticizing the whole tradition. Another materialist theory is by Donald Davidson, and it's got a name. All these theories have names. It's called anomalous monism. That's a hefty mouthful. Here's how it goes. Davidson says, think about how we explain human behavior, and you will see that it's pretty clear, and I'll use another piece of the blackboard. It's pretty clear that actions are caused by beliefs and desires. I'll abbreviate them as Bell and Des. And by the way, by the end of the semester, I begin to start thinking there must be a sitcom somewhere where the hero is Des and the heroine is Bell. But anyway, you're going to hear more about Bell and Des. Actions are caused by Bell and Des by beliefs and desires. All causation requires laws. Whenever there is I'll state this more pompously. Whenever there is a singular causal statement of the form A caused B, there must be a law which mentions A under some description, needn't be the same as in the singular statement, and mentions B under some description, and there must be a law-like correlation between A's and B's. Now, you needn't use the same jargon in the law as you used in the singular statement. If I say, the thing that John did saw the phenomenon that Sally saw, caused the phenomenon that Sally saw. Now, what John did was put the pot on the stove and turn the gas on. That's the thing he did. The phenomenon that Sally saw was the water boiling. Now, that's a true statement. What John did caused what Sally saw. But the law won't mention John and Sally, and it won't mention seeing and putting. It will have to do, I won't try to tell you the law, but it has to do with the behavior of water molecules in the Earth's atmosphere under pressure, under heat. So there will be a law, but the law won't be stated in the same terms as the singular causal statement. But Davidson's point is that there's got to be some law or other. Whenever there's a true singular causal statement of the form A caused B, belief and desire caused action, then there must be some law correlating the belief and the desire and the action. But now here comes the cruncher. There are no psychophysical laws, no laws mentioning beliefs and desires and psychophysical laws. Psychophysical laws. There are no mind and body laws. We could abbreviate that. That is, no laws correlating mental states and behavioral. Why? Well, says Davidson, in order to make attributions of beliefs and desires and all the rest of it, you have to presuppose rationality. Rationality is constitutive of having mental states. And rationality, hasn't, as Davidson says, hasn't got any echo in physics. You can't get a match between the rationality of beliefs and desires and physical events. So, actions are caused by beliefs and desires. That is, bodily movements caused by beliefs and desires. All causation requires laws, but there can't be any laws correlating beliefs and desires with bodily movements. There just cannot be such laws. Okay, says Davidson, either you've got a contradiction here, or there must be a way out, and he proposes the way out. And the way out is to say that the laws mention only physical events. They mention only brain states and muscle movements. But now that means that the mental states must be identical with brain states. It follows from this that I'm just going through the example here, we'll call this, we won't call it 4, we'll call it the conclusion, because it's the conclusion of the argument. The conclusion is that Bell and Des are physical states. In particular, they're brain states. So it's a version of the identity theory, only it's based on a different argument. The argument is that if mental states function causally, as they do, then there must be laws correlating the cause and the effect, but those laws can't mention states as mental, because there is no law-like correlation between the mental and the physical. The laws must all be stated in physical terms. The beliefs and desires are physical states, and this is a version of token identity theory, which you recognize from earlier lectures. It says every mental state is identical with a brain state, some brain state or other, and every belief is identical with some brain state, and every desire is identical with some brain state. Okay, so this is an argument for token identity theory based on what the dualists sometimes thought were an argument for them, namely that there can't be any laws of the psychophysical kind, of the kind that mentions minds and brains. Okay, I'm going through this fast. It's all in the reading. I want to stop and take questions now. Now, she had a hand up. Yeah. Davidson is a complete determinist, absolutely. Worst kind, in my opinion, a compatibilist. And I'll tell you about what's wrong with those guys later. Yeah.
When he says that what does he think about rationality?
Okay, that's a problem. Okay, here, let me state the problem exactly. It's a very deep question. If belief and desire are constituted by rationality, you can't have beliefs and desires without being a rational agent. And if Davidson agrees with that, but is a determinist, then what role can rationality have in determining behavior if beliefs and desires don't have any effect, if it's all fixed by the underlying neurobiology? And people who disagree with Davidson, as I do, accuse him typically of epiphenomenalism. It looks like if you take this view seriously, it leads to epiphenomenalism. Does everybody see that? Because it says, all our behavior is determined according to laws. And what do the laws mention? They don't mention psychology. They mention only physical states followed by physical events. Brain states followed by muscle movements. You might think your decision to raise your arm caused your arm to go up, but Davidson will show you it was all due to a sequence of neuron firings that finally ended in the secretion of acetylcholine at the axon end plates of the motor neurons, and then all hell breaks loose in the ion channels, and the damned arm goes up. You're going to get so bored with this example by the end of the semester, I can't help it. But in any case, it looks like it leads to epiphenomenalism because the mind isn't making any difference. Davidson thought he had an answer to that, but I forget what it is. But if you remind me, I'll look it up. He was here. I mean, he taught in Berkeley, and I've argued this stuff with him, and he had an answer to that. But I don't think it was a good answer. But I'll tell you about what it was later. Anyway, it's a deep question. Okay, so now I have finished presenting all the versions of materialism that I can think of. We went through behaviorism, type identity, token identity theory, physicalist reduction, functionalism, computer functionalism, anomalist monism, and eliminativism. And there's probably something I forgot. And anyway, on one of the questions on the handout sheet, you get a choice. Which one of these, or you can get in bed with Descartes if you want, which one of these theories of the mind do you think might be true? Okay, now I'm going to start criticizing them. But before we do that, let's take a deep breath and answer any other questions. I went through this kind of fast, so I want to make sure everybody understands it. Yes?
When talking about eliminativism, and you were breaking it down like there's no such thing as a rainbow.
Yeah.
That's in
right.
the same vein. But
yeah.
I clearly, when I look outside, I see a rainbow.
Yeah.
And that's how I know it. It's
yes.
not through the physical event. So how would the eliminativist explain that?
Okay, here is the problem. I did have at the back here the question. Standardly, in these discussions, there are two types of reduction. There's the non-eliminative reduction, such as water is H2O molecules. And a reduction is a kind of nothing but relation. Water's nothing but H2O molecules. But sometimes the nothing but relation eliminates the phenomenon that you're reducing. And in a sense, you want to say, well, the rainbows don't really exist as what they appear to be. There's no arch in the sky. In other languages, like French, it's called arc-en-ciel, an arch in the sky. There is no arch in the sky. It's an illusion. So you eliminate the rainbow when you reduce it to basically the refractive properties of water vapor under sunlight. You eliminate the rainbow by showing it doesn't really exist as a rainbow. You don't eliminate water when you say it's H2O molecules. No, it really is water. It's just composed of H2O molecules. Now, the point that he's raising is a good point. We're going to come back to it later. How can you do an eliminative reduction of something you actually experience? I actually do experience pain. If you say pain is just C fiber stimulation, then it looks like you're not going to be able to do an eliminative reduction of that. Now, the type identity theorists would agree to that. You don't get rid of pain by showing that it's really nothing but C fiber firings. But the eliminative reductionists, like Churchland, wanted to say, no, you're going to get rid of all of these entities because folk psychology is false. Okay, I'm going to come back to that when I criticize these guys, but that's one of the criticisms that we're going to consider. All right, shall we take a deep... Yes, other questions?
How does the eliminativist show that mental states exist only if folk psychology is true? Because if they've shown the arrow going the other direction, but if they only prove that direction, they're just denying it.
Here is the argument. The argument is, if you look at the history of science, and by the way, science has an almost religious status for many of these guys. If you look at the history of science, with a big capital S, it looks like it's one theory followed by another. Entities exist if they are postulated by true theories. Why? Because in order that the theory be true, there has to be some entity that plays the explanatory role assigned by the theory. This is why we're confident that electrons exist, but phlogiston or the celestial spheres does not exist, because the theory postulated by the phlogiston account of combustion or the celestial spheres theory of astronomy, those theories are false, and because they're false, there isn't any such entity. Now, that's the conception that they have. And the other argument goes, well, there's no smooth reduction. You can't reduce reduce beliefs and desires to brain states in a way that you can reduce water to H2O molecules. It's just going to be a mess, like things where you don't get a real phenomenon, like ghosts or something like that. Consequently, there won't be any such thing. It doesn't exist. Now, I think that's not a very good argument. I don't think either of those are good arguments. I do not postulate my desires to explain my behavior. Think about what it is to have a really strong desire. I mean, I don't know what your favorite form of lust is, but let's take a lust for pâtisserie, a lust for pastry. Okay, there's a famous guy in Thomas Mann in Buddenbrooks who dies with a chocolate eclair in his mouth in ecstasy. Because it's, well, anyway, okay, you may have a different kind of lust, but imagine this guy with his lust. for pastry. It was in German, Konditorei, and he's lusting after this pastry. Does he say, I postulate desire to account for my behavior? No, he just feels it. He feels the urge. And similarly, I want to say with beliefs and desires. Nobody examined his deepest held belief or his most passionate form of desire and said, it's just postulated to account for my behavior. No, these are actual names of human experiences. So I'm not convinced by these arguments. However, you will notice I'm resisting the temptation to criticize them. I'm just trying to make them sound as plausible as they can. And now I'm going to start criticizing the whole tradition. Other questions before we launch into that? Yeah, at the back. Yeah.
Why can't it just be the case that the physical laws govern, what mental states you have? So you can think whatever you want, but you can't do whatever you want.
Well, I think there are some psychophysical laws. If you look at neurobiology, one of the main research projects right now, as we sit here, is the laws concerning vision. What are the conditions under which you see red, and how do they differ from seeing green? So we are trying to get psychophysical laws, and nobody would say, well, you can't do the neurobiology of vision because Davidson showed there can't be psychophysical laws. I don't think it's true what he actually said. But the idea that he has is this: if you think of explaining behavior. Why did that guy vote for Obama? He voted for Obama because he thought Obama would have a better economic policy than McCain. Now, if you try to correlate would have a better economic policy, he believed that, with made the bodily movements that had constituted voting, it isn't going to look like science. It just the scientific laws don't mention things of that size. It's the wrong type of phenomenon to figure in a scientific law, and I think Davidson's probably right about that. These are not the sort of thing that our laws are about. The short answer is there will be some psychophysical laws, but Davidson, I think, would feel all the same. The heart of his argument remains, namely, that for complex forms of intentionality, I haven't explained intentionality yet, but belief and desire and all that kind of stuff, you don't get a law-like correlation between that and bodily movements in a way that you get a law-like correlation between a force and mass and acceleration. You don't get that kind of law. Do you want to say some more, though? I'm not sure I answered your question.
I'm just wondering whether that's not an undue demand, though.
Yeah. Well, the heart of Davidson's argument is this one, and everybody believes that. All causation requires laws. I don't think that's true, and I'm going to come back to that. That is one of the deepest held beliefs of our philosophical culture, is that the only fact of the matter that corresponds to a causal claim is the law. Why do we believe that? Hume. There are a series of great disasters after Descartes. These guys are all geniuses. I don't doubt that. And I think they're wonderful. But Hume's theory of causation, where it basically says there aren't any such things as causes. They're just correlations. They're, as in his jargon, just constant conjunction. That view is widely held. I don't hold it, but I'm going to talk about it when we get to Hume. We have a long way to go. It'll be Easter well, I don't promise that. But anyway, we'll get to Hume before the end of the semester. Okay, other questions? Yes?
I'm a little confused on the idea that if a theory is wrong, that it's wrong. I feel like there might be some cases in which the entities could just be proving another theory that we just haven't thought of yet. So I feel like saying that they're wrong just because the theory is wrong isn't necessarily
right. No, that's an ingenious argument. I don't know if anybody's ever presented it. Let me state it. The argument goes as follows. If you say the entities don't exist because the theory is wrong, well, it's possible you might get another theory that postulated those entities. And that, I think, formally speaking, you're right. I think there's a deeper objection to these people, and that is, for most of these entities in question, they're not postulated. as part of a theory. The reason we say they exist is they exist. The reason I say I have beliefs and desires is not because I find it convenient in predicting my behavior. No, the reason I say I have beliefs and desires is because I have them. And the reason I say phlogiston doesn't exist is because it doesn't exist. There is no such stuff. We found out that it didn't exist by finding out that the theory was false. But whether or not something exists is independent of the question what role it plays in a scientific theory, at least for most entities. Now, maybe in very fancy theories, like string theory, you only postulate the strings as part of the theory. And if the theory goes, then I guess the strings go with it. But for the kind of stuff we're talking about, chairs and tables and dogs and cats, we don't postulate them. I postulate that my dog exists in order to account for my theory of caninity. That's total. I'm going to bring Gilbert around and let you see what it is for a doggy to exist. Gilbert doesn't give a damn about the theory of caninity, and why should he? Okay, so I'm having trouble resisting criticizing these guys, so let me launch into a criticisms now of the whole tradition. Now, everybody's got their own criticism, and people are proud of theirs, and if I leave somebody out, their feelings are always hurt, so I'll try and get everybody in. But basically, I think pretty much all of the criticisms are the same. The criticisms of materialism are always the materialist account leaves out something crucial. It leaves out some crucial phenomenon. Intentionality or consciousness or something. It leaves out some crucial element. And formally speaking, since you're all professional philosophers, the form of that argument is that the statement of the theory does not give sufficient conditions of the phenomenon that it was trying to explain. So, pain is one thing, pain behavior is something else. And if you try to say, well, pain just reduces to pain behavior, that's behaviorism, then you left out something. You left out the pain. You left out the feeling. And if you say, well, all the same, we will give the conditions under which somebody's in pain, namely, he emits pain behavior, or he would, under certain conditions, emit pain behavior, then you failed to give sufficient conditions, because the dispositional features that you identify, namely his disposition to emit pain behavior and his actually emitting pain behavior, those are not sufficient for having a pain. So I think those are the forms in which these arguments that I'm going to give you take. And I'll just give you a whole bunch of arguments here. Can I erase this? I mean, we're going to leave Davidson for the time being. It's interesting, though, with good philosophical theories and powerful theories, you don't actually have to state it in the jargon that the author stated it. I don't even remember how Davidson stated it, but I'm confident that's what he was saying, that actions are caused by psychological states, that whenever there's a causal relation, there has to be a law, and there are no laws correlating psychological states and behavior and physical movements, no psychophysical laws. Okay, I'm now going to give you a whole bunch of objection against materialism. Now, the most common objection, the one you hear over and over, has got a name. It's called absent qualia. Again, I don't much like this jargon, but let me explain it to you. All of our conscious states have a certain qualitative feel to the state. If you think of the difference between listening to Mozart, drinking beer, and working on your income tax, well, those are three different kinds of states. It just feels different, drinking beer or working on your income tax. You don't work on your income tax and you say, you know, Form 1040 is a lot like German beer. It just isn't. I mean, it's just a different kind of well, I don't have to tell you this. It's too obvious. Okay, all conscious states have a certain qualitative character, and so some philosophers have thought, well, let's talk about qualia. That's the plural. The singular is quale. Each conscious state is a certain quale, and the whole batch comes out to qualia. And then they think, well, some conscious states are qualia and others aren't. So just having a conscious belief doesn't have any qualitative feel to it, but having a pain does have a qualitative feel. Now, I don't like the word qualia and quale because it seems to me all consciousness is qualitative. The whole idea these people have is some consciousness is qualitative and some isn't, and we need a word to name the qualitative kind. I think all consciousness is qualitative. Well, but somebody might say, how about thinking 2 + 2 = 4? There's no special qualitative feel to thinking 2 + 2 = 4. It isn't like feeling a pain or feeling depressed. There's no qualitative feel to 2 + 2 = 4. I think that's wrong. Try thinking it in French or German. It feels different. 2 et 2, ça fait 4. 2 und 2 sind 4. You can't speak German without sounding like you're a Nazi. I'm sorry about that. But in any case, there's a certain qualitative feel to thinking these, or at least I can, about thinking these things in whatever you have a conscious state, there's a qualitative characteristic to that conscious state. So I don't use the word qualia because it seems to me redundant. It gives us the illusion that there are different kinds of consciousness, qualitative and non-qualitative. It's all qualitative. When we get to a theory of consciousness, I'll explain that. Okay, but now the point for the present discussion is all of these theories left out the qualia. They left out the conscious states. So the behaviorist theory and the token identity theory and the type theory, all of those theories left out the feel. They left out the conscious feel of the mental states. Probably the single most powerful statement of this argument doesn't use the notion of qualia, at least not as far as I remember, and that's Nagel's argument about what is it like to be a bat. Now, there's a famous article, and it's in the reading, or if it isn't, I'll assign it. I want you to read it. It's in the reader. Now, here's his argument. The functionalists say that we're going to be able to explain mental states in terms of causal relations between external stimuli and output behavior, where the causal relations are mediated by brain processes. So you have stimulus, brain processes, external behavior, and that's the story. But, says Nagel, you might have complete knowledge, you might have perfect 100% knowledge of what it is like for the bat to receive external stimuli and engage in behavior, but there's still a problem left over. What does it feel like to be a bat? You see, bats have a different lifestyle from ours. They spend all day long hanging upside down asleep. That I can't imagine it's any fun, but that's the way they do it. Okay, then when darkness comes, they fly around and navigate by sonar. They bounce sonar off the walls, and that's why they can avoid banging into the wall even though it's pitch dark. Now the problem is, what does it feel like? Or in Nagel's jargon, what's it like? What's it like to be a bat? And he says, this is the characteristic of human and animal consciousness. For any conscious state, there is an answer to the question, what's it like to have that state? This is almost the definition of consciousness. For any conscious state, there's an answer to the question, what's it like? That's why there is an answer to the question, well, what's it like to be a member of the Tea Party, or to be Princess Diana, or to be a football, a Super Bowl quarterback? Meaning, what does it feel like to be one of these characters having these experiences? But there's no answer to the question, what's it like to be a piece of chalk? See, we don't think, well, maybe this chalk is really thinking, that bastard is going to rub me against the blackboard again. I'm going to be diminished by his inexorable pedagogy. Because there isn't anything that it's like to be a piece of chalk. The piece of chalk doesn't have any feelings, and all these others do. So Nagel says, and here's the punchline of the argument. Here's the force of the argument. You could have perfect knowledge of all the bat's functional relations. You could know every computer program, every neurotransmitter, every neurobiological fact that there was to be known about the bat, but all the same, there's something left out. What's it feel like? You don't know what it's like to be a bat. What does it feel like? And there's no way that these theories, any of these theories that I have mentioned, can account for what it's like. And that means something is left out. There's something, the crucial element of consciousness got left out of all of these theories. And indeed, there is a further development of that argument. I don't know that these guys point out that the two arguments are similar, but it seems to me that they obviously are. And that's Frank Jackson's argument, what Mary knew. Okay, but let me get the force of Nagel's argument, because it's a very influential argument. His argument is, for any conscious state, there's an answer to the question, what's it like to have that state? That's the definition of consciousness. For any conscious feeling, there is a what it's like aspect to the feeling. In a way, there's no what it's like aspect. Well, what's it like to be this building? Or what's it like to be a piece of chalk or a brick or a shingle? There is an answer to the question, what's it like to be a bat? Or what's it like to be a dog? Or what's it like to be an unemployed factory worker? All of those questions have answers, because for any state of consciousness, there's a what it's like aspect to that state. Okay, now, says Nagel, grant me that, and you'll see that all of these theories we've considered, from behaviorism through functionalism, all leave that out. They leave out the what it's like aspect, and the proof is a very simple proof. You could have perfect knowledge of the bat. You could know everything there was to know about the bat, but you still wouldn't know what it's like. Now I want you to see that's really a kind of variation of absent qualia, only it brings it down to a concrete example. The absent qualia guy says, well, all these theories just left out qualia. Nagel says, nail it down to a specific case. We all know something about bats, but none of us know what it's like to be a bat. And the fact is, it seems impossible that we should ever know what it's like to be a bat. There's another example that I like to use, but it's the same form as Nagel's. There are birds that navigate by detecting the Earth's magnetic field. Now, what does it feel like to detect the Earth's magnetic field? You can sort of imagine what it's like to be a bird. You're a bird flapping your wings, flying over San Francisco Bay, feeling the breeze and the rain and all that kind of stuff. Now, you mustn't cheat. The way we cheat is always, well, what would it be like for me up there? No, that's cheating. You got to imagine what it's like to be a bird. You got to shrink down to bird kind of size. You can't think, flying over San Francisco Bay, man, it's sure going to be hard on my shirt and tie. No, that's cheating. You have to imagine what it's like for a bird over San Francisco Bay. But now I get stuck when it comes to the magnetic field. Yes, I can imagine feeling the wind and the rain, but a surge of magnetism, where do I feel it? I have no idea. That's the same argument as Nagel's giving, and what he's saying is a perfect scientific account of bats and birds and other people leaves out a crucial element, what's it like? And then Nagel goes further and he says, given our existing conceptual apparatus, we could not imagine an adequate theory of consciousness. Because when adequate theories of anything give an account of something, why is this table solid? Why does water pour? They show why, given the molecular behavior, the surface features have to be like that. It has to be solid. The water has to pour, but no amount of the brain would ever show why it has to be conscious. So given our conceptual apparatus, we cannot have an explanation of consciousness. Now that's a much more depressing conclusion than just the rejection of the materialist tradition. He's saying, for us to try to imagine how the brain could cause consciousness would be like an ancient Greek trying to imagine how matter and energy could be the same. If you went into a bar in 5th century Athens, well, I don't know, a bar. You went into a place where they sell Retsina. Okay, I don't know if they were bars. And you told people in the bar that, well, you know, matter and energy are really the same. They'd think you'd had too much Retsina or Ouzo or something. They wouldn't be able to make sense out of it. Now, we needed a major conceptual revolution to think of matter and energy as the same. Similarly, it would take an equivalent, it would take a similar big deal revolution to come to the view that brain states cause consciousness. How is it supposed to work? How are they supposed to be part of the same realm? So Nagel is very pessimistic about having a theory of brain processes and consciousness because he thinks we do not have the conceptual apparatus to make the connection between the physical and the mental. This is a point where I've disagreed with him for years, but I'll come back to that. Right now I'm telling you his views, and they're very influential. The stuff I've asked you to read, his article is influential, maybe more influential than any of the others. Okay, so I've mentioned 2 arguments against materialism, and I think they're obviously related. The absent qualia argument, and Nagel's what it's like to be a bat argument. Let's stop for questions about those 2. I want you to yes.
Would Nagel say that he knows what it's like to be Nagel?
Yes, Nagel would say, I know what it's like to be Nagel because I am Nagel. And now I can sort of imagine what it's like to be Nagel. He likes living in New York. I like living in California. I like skiing. He doesn't like skiing. Okay, so there are all these little differences. But basically, I don't have a big deal problem in trying to figure out what it's like to be Tom Nagel. But when it gets to bats, then I got a problem. Or it gets to other sorts of animals. But there is a deeper point here, and that is even with other people, you feel there's always an element that you don't really know. There's always an element that's beyond your comprehension. You can share in their satisfactions and dissatisfactions up to a point. But there are certain sorts of literary tastes that I cannot imagine sharing. I won't tell you who I can't stand. There are, well, okay, let me show you some cultural differences. Later on, we're going to talk about the background, and each of us has a background. And you think you're pretty liberal, but in fact, when you encounter people who have a totally different background from you, you're likely to find that it's an impediment. When I first went to China, I was impressed by the wonderful quality of the food. But at one wonderful banquet in Shanghai, this was in 1988, they brought around course after course, and one course consisted in deep fried scorpions. Now, what have I got against eating scorpions? Well, I did. And it became a macho thing. The guys ate their scorpions and the girls didn't eat theirs. They were trying to push them off onto us. I ate one scorpion. It tasted a lot like bacon, actually. But at first it was kind of disgusting. And I don't want to go back and eat more. Or we had in another great banquet, we had a fabulous course, and I asked what it was. Turned out we'd been eating rats. Bamboo rats. Okay. Now, most of you, like me, don't relish the idea, let's have a course of rats. And I wouldn't have eaten it if I had known what it was. So those are cases where you can sort of imagine what it's like to relish eating rats or scorpions, but it takes an effort. But it's much tougher to imagine what it's like to relish flying around in the dark, enjoying banging sonar, navigating by banging sonar off of objects. So Nagel is, I think, saying it's a matter of degree, how much you can know what it's like to be somebody else. But when it comes to bats and spiders, you can't really know what it's like. Yes?
So, like, using a token identity theory I don't think that Nagel leaves out the possibility that because we're not running the back program, as it were, because it's not because we're not using the back hardware. So
yes.
we can't know what it's like.
Okay, but now if we're talking about a strong AI, the hardware doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters is the program. And this, you remember, is one of the great lessons of computer science, multiple realizability. So the BATS program can be implemented in any hardware, and what matters is the program, not the hardware. We happen to be implemented in this icky wetware, but any hardware would do. Oh, by the way, I meant to put my criticism of Kurzweil's thing on BSpace, but I don't know if we got the whole article. I think I have to go back and do that. They gave a ridiculous title. It's called "I Married a Computer," is the title that the New York Review gave. I never fight with them. Let them decide on the titles. Well, it gets me in a lot of trouble sometimes. But in any case, I did review his book where he talks about the where he endorses the computational theory of the mind. Yes.
In fact, his example, it seems that we could say that some hardware have different capabilities than others. Some hardware read floppy disks, others read DVDs.
Yes.
We're hardware that read floppy disks. If we could upgrade to ones that read DVDs,
right.
we would, but we can't.
Yes, okay. Now this is Ray Kurzweil's attitude exactly. His attitude is, look, we are a certain kind of hardware that can implement certain types of programs. Why not become better hardware? What we'll do is download all of the information in your brain onto a decent hard disks. And then those will then be implemented in a different kind of body. So under this system that he's proposing, you will have immortality because what matters is the program, and the program can be implemented in any hardware. And we can put you in hardware that won't rust or wear out. You needn't be in these damn carbon-based icky organic molecules. You can use plastics or something like that won't wear out. Now, I'm not sympathetic with that view, but I haven't criticized it yet. We'll get to that. Yes?
I mean, I'm not suggesting that we could ever do that. I'm just saying that could explain potentially why we can't, for example, read magnetic waves or so.
I see. The idea is we're just in too weak a hardware. And okay, so the answer to Nagel might be that if we could get into the bat's hardware, then we could appreciate the feelings of the bat, something like that, or we could simulate the bat's hardware. But that's still not going to be enough, because that says what matters is the causal powers of the hardware. And this stuff, the views that we're considering don't say that. They say the program is by itself sufficient. Yes?
Just going back to the question, what's it like to be me?
Yeah.
I couldn't give you an answer.
Yeah.
I know the answer.
Yeah.
I couldn't give you an answer for the bat, but for a whole different reason.
Yeah. No, that's right. And some of the people who've criticized Nagel says, well, the type of knowledge in question isn't the type of that we're interested in, because it's not scientific knowledge. What we're interested in is not knowing in the sense of, do you know the smell of saffron? But what we're really interested in is theoretical knowledge. But I think Nagel's argument to that would be, all the same, you've left something out. Forget about the word know. You've left out the particular qualitative feeling. Okay, there's a third variant of this argument due to Frank Jackson, an Australian. Jackson says, imagine that there was a brilliant neuroscientist, Mary. And Mary knows all there is to know about the neuroscience of vision, particularly color vision. She knows all that any human being could possibly know about color vision. She has a perfect knowledge. However, Mary has always lived inside a room in which there are no colors. Everything is in white and gray and black. There are no colors at all. Now, Mary lives in the colorless room, becomes a world expert on colors. She knows all there is to know. But one day she goes outdoors and sees red for the first time. Now the argument goes, she knows something that she didn't know before. But what this shows is that in her state where she had only third-person objective knowledge of color vision, where she knew only the functionalism and the computer programs and all that, there was something left out, and this something left out is what's essential to the mind. She knows what it's like to see red, and she never knew that before. Now notice, I want you to see these arguments are pretty much all the same. Absent qualia says the qualia got left out. Nagel's argument says you can't know what it's like to be a bat. And Jackson says when Mary came to see red for the first time, she came to know something that she didn't know before. This is called the knowledge argument because apparently because it seems it depends on what can be known, what is actually what the nature of the knowledge that Mary has when she goes outside and sees something red is now different from what it was before. Now there's an interesting footnote to this, and that is, I think that's a pretty good argument. I like that argument, and it's the most famous argument that Jackson ever thought of. He gave up on it. He thinks it's not valid. Now, I don't know why. I wrote him a letter. I wrote him an email and said, why the hell did you give up on this argument? It's a pretty good argument. It's a rare thing in philosophy. I almost never write to philosophers telling me you got a good argument. And he wrote back an irrelevant letter saying how much he admired my recent work and all this blah, but he didn't want to face up to it. So I don't know why he gave up on it, but I'll try and find out. But I think it's a pretty good argument. Anyway, he gave up. Okay, there is a variant of all of these arguments which keeps coming up, and that is spectrum inversion. Now, each of us sees red, and each of us sees green. So when I look at this bag, I bought it in Shanghai, and it's starting to look kind of filthy. But anyway, when I look at this bag, I see red. And when I look at the cover of this book, I see sort of green. Okay, everybody's got you can kind of pick out the green. All right, now each of us has words, red and green, to describe those experiences. But now imagine that there was a section of the population that had an inversion of red and green. So what I call seeing red, if they could have that experience, they would call it seeing green. And what I call seeing green, if they could have that experience, they would call it seeing red. Now notice the behavior for both of us is the same. They look at this, and I ask what color, they say it's red. Only they have an experience that I would call seeing green. They look at this, and if I ask what color it is, they say it's green. Only they have an experience that if I could see it, I would call it seeing red. Their behavior is the same. They go when the light changes from red to green, and they stop when it changes back to red. They pass the Air Force color blindness tests, but all the same, what's going on inside is different. Does everybody get the thought experiment? I think there's something appealing about this. It occurred to me when I was a freshman in college and studying biology. Well, how the hell do you know that these animals, or that even other people, have the same experience of color that we have? How do you know that they don't have? And then the label, I didn't have this label, but the label that it has acquired is called spectrum inversion. How do we know that they don't have an inverted spectrum, where what they call seeing red, I would call seeing green, and what they call seeing green, I would call seeing red? Okay, now here is the point of that. If that's even possible, then there's something left out of the materialist accounts. Because on the materialist accounts of the mental, they would have to have the same experience as I do, because the behavior is the same, the functional relations are the same, the cause and effect relations are the same. Throughout, it's all the same. But nonetheless, they might be having different experiences. And if that's even possible, if it's even logically possible, then the materialist accounts cannot be accurate. They have not given us account of the logically possible conditions for having experience. Does everybody see that argument? And I want you to see it's a lot like the other arguments. It says the character of the experience of red and green is not captured by the third-person phenomenon of causation, functional relations, what their behavior is. Their behavior is the same. So it looks like materialism is refuted. Yes, you had a question. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems to me like this is a very specific case that first assumes that you can't have the same experience, that someone can have your same experience of seeing red. Like if we both see red, I might experience something different than you, but it's not what you saw was seeing green.
Yeah.
So it seems like you're first assuming that I can have your green experience when I see red, and then using that to guarantee that we can have the same experience for different things. I'm never seeing guarantee.
Yeah. The idea is not that in a particular case we can't have the same experience, but the idea is, look, it's possible that people might have the same behavior, the same cause and effect relations, and all the same have different experiences. That's the point. It's a possibility argument. It's not thinking, well, we ought to do something for that poor section of the population that when they look at red, they don't get to see honest to John red, but they see what they really ought to call green. That's not, the worry is not that that might be actually happening. The worry is a possibility. It's possible that there might be a section of the population that did this, and that possibility is not blocked by the materialist accounts. The materialists leave that possibility open, but that shows materialism isn't adequate to account for the facts, because on a materialist account, there can't be any possibility that all the material phenomena are the same and the mental phenomena are different, because the whole point of materialism was to eliminate the mental in favor of the physical. Now, I'm not really sure I understood your question properly, but if that doesn't answer it, ask it again. Is that, you got it? Or I can come back to you later. Okay. Okay, we'll save it for later. I tried to answer it, but I want to make sure I got it. She has a question. Yeah.
If there is like a behavioral test you could do to see someone has an inverted spectrum, is materialism still...
Ask it again.
Like, I learned in a different class that there is actually a test, like a behavior test you could do to see if somebody had an inverted spectrum.
Yeah.
Does that make
Well, did Steve Palmer teach it? Yeah, I knew it would be Steve. Yes, Steve has a good neurobiological argument against this. I think he misses the point. I misses the philosophical point. The philosophical point is not about how the visual system is actually structured. I mean, Palmer is probably the best living vision scientist. He's, so to speak, the Mary of Berkeley. And he's written a terrific book, which you should all read about this. Here I'm selling some other guy's book. But he thinks that he has a purely neurobiological answer to the spectrum inversion. I don't think, I've forgotten the details, but I remember when I heard him give it, I thought it misses the point. The philosophical point is not that, well, maybe those poor bastards can't really see honest to John red. The point is that there is this logical possibility, regardless of what the neurobiology is. So I don't think that meets the point. Okay, any other questions at this point? Now I want to get through. Yes, Jennifer.
Do conscious really care about the irrelevant sensations, since it really has no causal relevance whatsoever? So let's say that you have an itch.
Yeah.
Whenever I see red.
Yeah.
But we both behave in the same way.
Doesn't matter. Well, that's another argument that the functionalists give is, look, suppose all these guys were right, you know, all these Nagels with their touchy-feely, their friendly bats and all that kind of stuff. Who cares? We're hard-nosed scientists now, and as hard-nosed scientists, we want to know how the physical world works. And if there is all this stuff going on, all these thoughts and feelings and all this qualia. And people, by the way, who hold this view sometimes refer to what they call qualia files, you know, people who are goofy about qualia. And one of the general accounts is, well, consciousness, yeah, all right, let them have their consciousness. It's something that happens in California anyway. But it doesn't matter for science. By the way, I've heard this argument at MIT and places like that. They say, all right, maybe in California you have all that kind of touchy-feely crap. But in hard-nosed places like MIT, where we're doing real science, it doesn't matter. And that's another argument that says consciousness doesn't really matter. Now, that is such a breathtakingly bad argument. I mean, the immediate answer to it is consciousness. It isn't just that consciousness matters, it's the condition of anything mattering, is that you be conscious. If nobody had ever been conscious, there wouldn't have been any mattering about anything. And that leads to another argument, which is called the zombie argument. And the zombie argument says, look, it can't be the case that I am equivalent to a certain type of functional mechanism, because you could imagine something that was exactly like me, as philosophers sometimes like to say, that was molecule for molecule identical with me, but was totally unconscious. You can imagine a system that looked like me, behaved like me, had exactly my same behavioral dispositions, my same functional relations, but was a zombie. A zombie in philosophy is something that looks and behaves exactly like a conscious being, but has no consciousness whatever. Now, the argument goes, the materialist versions that we have considered, all of them don't answer the possibility of zombies, because it would be possible for somebody to satisfy all these conditions, have the right computer programs, the right functional relations, and not have any consciousness at all. Now, the aim of their theories is to account for the mind, but they can't account for the mind because they have a theory that admits the possibility that the theory could be true and nobody has any mental states at all, that everybody could be a zombie. But since I'm not a zombie, then their theory is false because it can't account for me. This is the zombie argument. The zombie argument says any third-person account of the mind must be inadequate because the third-person account, by third person I just mean it leaves out subjectivity, it leaves out qualia, it leaves out the qualitative character. It just describes what is objectively accessible to any observer. Any such account leaves out a crucial feature of the mind, namely qualia, consciousness, intentionality, all of these what it's like aspects of the mind. And the proof is that there on the accounts that they've given us, there could be, and indeed independently we know, there could be a system that looked and behaved exactly like me, but had no mental states at all, was a total zombie. So the possibility of zombies is sufficient to refute the various forms of materialism, because if we're not zombies, as we're not, then any theory has to show the difference between us and zombies, and these theory can't show that because these theories would admit that somebody could satisfy the theory and still be a zombie. I detect the restiveness among the natives here that suggests that maybe the hour is over. Okay, I don't know if this is fun or not, but we're going to go on with this next time, and I'm going to tell you more criticisms of materialism.